there's the insight, right? There's the, okay, now you have all this data, you have all this knowledge about yourself. And then there's action. Now what do I do with it? Now that I know about all these genes, now what can I do, to your point, to sort of optimize my right lifestyle? What is my right eating window? And that's where the genes kind of give you the data, the information. Oh, you know what? You actually do just fine on a wider window. A lot of those questions really can get answered with a test from a good company, of course.
I think the easiest way to start the conversation is to actually define what nutrigenomics is. Then it'll make sense to people once they hear it. I mean, I think a lot of people don't necessarily recognize what it is, but it makes sense. Like once you say it, it's like, oh, okay, the interplay of epigenetics and nutrition and how that can turn genes on and off. But this is actually what brought you into this nutrigenomics, and probably the need for having individuals who were savvy being able to take the research and combine it with nutritional recommendations and bioindividuality is probably being a teacher, because that's where you started your career, was probably a kind of a normal extension of what you were interested in.
Absolutely. So I say I was a teacher before I became a clinical nutritionist. And so I do have the heart of a teacher, and I love to educate the people that I work with and really spend time so that they understand the mechanisms of how their bodies work. But so nutrigenomics is this marriage between nutrition and genomics. And genetics kind of falls into three buckets, right? So everyone's heard of 23andMe or Ancestry.com, and that is really looking at where did you come from, right? Like, are you mostly European or Asian or African? And so that's one bucket of genetics. Then there's this whole other bucket of genetics, which is all about diseases. And that bucket tends to look at one gene that's a real anomaly and how to treat this gene. And there is no amount of food or an anti-inflammatory protocol that's going to treat that disease, really. So that kind of genetics is not what we're talking about here. So nutrigenomics is really looking at these not these fixed genes, but the more malleable genes, where you have all the power in the world to influence their expression. And so what's really neat is that in this field, you can look at sort of a family, a group of genes that will pertain to a particular area or system in your body, say, detoxification, or, genes that pertain to fitness, right? I'm actually pretty injury prone, and I didn't know that I have some variants on collagen genes, that if you looked at that, there are genes that can tell you if you would do better with more endurance training, or sort of with, better with lifting. And I didn't understand any of that until I got into this, but it makes perfect sense. If you give two people a marathon plan, let's say, and one person does great with it and the other person gets injured, that's all based on your genetics. And, someone like Usain Bolt, he has a very particular set of genes your genes are just potential. They're not sort of, oh, you're doomed to XYZ. It's just potential. But if you don't, A, have the potential, or B, use that potential, it's not going to express. So, I find it fascinating. I think it's really the future of our profession to really understand, this body of science. It's still so new, and, I'm constantly evolving with how I learn to translate these things and interpret them, because it's so important to look at the whole person, right? Just because you do have what we say, spelling changes in your genes, that's kind of all they are. It's how we make words and then sentences, and we make meaning that's out of our language. That's all we're doing with looking at gene translation, is we now have 4 letters, and you might have some changes on those letters. And are you doomed? No. And they might not even be expressing at the moment based on how you're living. So I find it all fascinating, but it is important to really kind of look at the whole person and what's going on, and what is their family history, and what do they like to eat, how do they manage stress, all of those pieces, are so important.
Well, and I think it's an important distinction. So, as an example, when I was kind of preparing for this, the recognition, as someone that was in graduate school and undergrad during the time of, the Human Genome Project, I remember, my faculty members that were, especially in oncology research, were really excited about this. So I'm really dating myself, but it's relevant. So when we're looking at these genetics, looking at differentiating between high penetrance, so like a BRCA gene, genetics that make people more susceptible to developing certain types of cancers, versus things like MTHFR, which, if anyone's familiar with that, I actually have 2 copies. That's considered to be, correct me if I'm wrong, low penetrance, because it
Totally.
doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have all these problems. And what's interesting is, even though I myself, I think I'm pretty well versed in the very basic of basics related to this, I have many family members, not surprisingly, who they're all homozygous for this particular gene, the MTHFR. And probably 10 years ago, they started all taking methylfolate and methylated vitamins. And
Which is
one of
all you
them,
need.
right. And so what's interesting is, you could take 10 of us, and most of us were taking methylated vitamins. And then one person got sick from taking the vitamins. And so
Really?
I ended up going to
Yes.
the emergency room. And so it really just
Oh,
speaks to the fact that there's no one size fits all philosophy. Like,
it's
we
true.
all have differing lifestyle choices that can influence whether or not these genes are activated or not. And your work really focuses in on the low penetrance. So the things that are not,
Totally.
it's not like correlation means causation. Like, you can have a
Totally.
gene, and if it doesn't get turned on, you may not even have any issues. But really relevant, and something that we were talking about before, is things like recognizable MTHFR is one I think a lot of people are familiarized with. I think
It's
about,
gotten too much attention though, and
yeah,
too much importance.
yeah.
A lot of these genes, this people are looking at them in isolation and freaking out
Do you think
and
it's
saying,
sensationalized by the media, or do you think it's people who are trying to better understand what's going on and they want to fix? Like, haven't we conditioned our patients that a pill is going to fix whatever ails them, and people think a supplement's going to fix everything? And I always remind people, like, you really have to lean into the lifestyle piece. Like, it's still, there's no quick fix. Like, you really do have to
no,
do the work. I'd love to just snap my fingers and make it easy, but the work is still the work.
the work is still the work. I, yeah, I guess you really do have to look at so much more than just one. It's low-hanging fruit to do that and panic. Um, we've talked even about ApoE, and there's so much attention around ApoE, and oh my gosh, and you're going to get Alzheimer's if you now, it is true that it has been identified that there's a higher likelihood, especially, and the reason for, you get 2 copies, right? You get some from your one parent and the other parent. So with the 4-4, if you have that, or even the 3-4, yes, it's a higher risk, right? It's risk, but that's still potential.
Mhm.
And those are just older variants. And because they're older, they what that means is it conferred benefits way back when, and they haven't changed. They haven't adapted to this newer, more modernized food that we're eating. And so people who might have a 3-4-4-4 and are now eating a lot of grains, a lot of starch, and a lot of sugar, and have a lot of stress, and and are drinking a lot of alcohol, they haven't adapted. And it could potentially, again, we have to stress that potential, uh but also, again, looking at maybe some other SNPs would be interesting too, to see if they have adaptations elsewhere.
Well, and it's interesting because my own experience is with the MTHFR, which I kind of got to a point where I just wanted to stop worrying about it,
Yeah.
because I think if I weren't doing all the right things for me, that it might have expressed or created other issues. And so I think this is really important to kind of identify what are the things people do in their personal lives that can impact gene expression, because there are probably people listening saying, this sounds like alphabet soup, I don't know how to make it relevant. Let's make it really relevant so that people understand, like, when we talk about doing the work, it is the most important work. It really, really is. I talk a lot about circadian rhythms. I talk a lot about circadian biology. A lot of this is around feeding and fasting windows. But in terms of relevance, what are the aspects of lifestyle that you feel like make the largest net impact on whether or not that gene turns on or off?
Well, it's a little bit reversed, in that. So Yael Joffe talks about this. She's a nutrigenomics expert, and she talks about, there's the insight, right? There's the, okay, now you have all this data, you have all this knowledge about yourself, and then there's action. Now what do I do with it? Now that I know about all these genes, now what can I do, to your point, to sort of optimize my right lifestyle? What is my right eating window? And that's where the genes kind of give you the data, the information. Oh, you know what? You actually do just fine on a wider window. This other person is glucose intolerant, and not so insulin sensitive. With these particular variants they have, they need to stop eating early. I've seen it. Of course, you've seen it too in your practice, where you have people doing maybe a traditional 12 to 8 intermittent fasting window, but you move them to a 9 to 5, and things start changing for them. And so all of that is based on their genetics. And one of the most interesting family of we really call them transcription factors, so they're like switches, is that PPAR alpha. It's the whole PPAR family, actually, because it's alpha and it's gamma, and there's delta. There's all these Greek letters that go with them, but it's PPAR, and it has a lot to do with your utilization of fat. So for people who have difficulty with their PPAR, well, fasting doesn't feel great to them, and so they might need to do that traditional 3 meals a day, and just start their day with some protein, and then other people just have no issues. They go right, that they can do all this extended fasting, and they feel amazing, and they have all the energy in the world. Again, it's genetics. It's really, really fascinating. And with low carb, there's also a lot of nuances, right? Because in the whole low carb space, we can find people who are like, oh, it's higher protein. Oh, it's higher fat. Oh, can you tolerate more carb cycling or not? Which carbs are we talking about? Should you be doing more saturated fats? Can you have dairy? Should you not have dairy? And again, it's genetics. So a lot of those questions really can get answered with a test from a good company, of course.
Well, I know 23andMe because I've actually run that. And then this is before they made some changes. And then I ran the data through Gene Genie, which I'm not even sure if that's even out there anymore. And even then, with all the training I have, I remember saying, like, it looks like alphabet soup. So I'm sure for
Yes.
people listening, they're like, I don't know what any of this represents. So
And that's why I think it is important to take your data to a qualified professional to interpret it for you and sit down with you and ask you about your actual lifestyle, because you want to put it into context. What is the family history? How do you live? Do you sleep? Do you have problems sleeping? Just because you have variance with melatonin and clock, it's maybe you don't have any sleep issues. Or yes, I can validate that for you. Okay, it's right here in your genes. And so here, maybe you do need to take some melatonin. Maybe you do need to take some magnesium. It is important to sit down with someone and really, and have them look at this, not so that you're not looking at just the alphabets, because you aren't just a bunch of letters. You're a human being with a whole bunch of things going on in your world, and you want to look at it in context. And then additionally, which I think is really important, is if you can add other data to that too, like, are you wearing a continuous glucose monitor? Example, Cynthia. um, I, I do tend to use low carb ketogenic protocols for a lot of the people that come and find me, because they're, it's stubborn weight loss, or maybe, they're recovering from cancer and things like that. So it is a protocol I tend to use. Those are the people that typically are finding me. But I've had people where it doesn't work. And then we run their genetic profiles, and boy, they really shouldn't be eating red meat and saturated fat, and they don't have issues with the grains, and it just changes the dietary approach.
well, and as I'm listening to you, I'm curious because obviously after our discussion, I'm going to reach out to you and say, hey, I'd love to get your professional opinion because I'll give everyone an example. I lean carnivore-ish. I do cycle my carbs, but I feel best eating meat, and I'm able to maintain being healthy life stage, even though I'm now middle aged. But what's interesting is, we're a family of four, and so half my family loves fatty meat, and the other half doesn't. And I can tell you, if I eat a large bolus of animal based fat, like let's say I go to a restaurant and I have duck fat fries, I will be sick. And I have a healthy gallbladder. That's not the issue. But for me, I do best with lean protein and plant based fats. Whereas half my family does really well with, like, they have a ribeye, I have a filet. They have a piece of salmon. Generally, I'll have like a leaner piece of fish. And it's almost to the point where my older son is the same way. There's something about that, the way that fat feels on our tongue, that is so unappealing. And I'm sure there's probably a genetic piece to all of this.
Yes.
And so I find it fascinating. Anyway, I just wanted to interject that clearly there are genetic influences that will gravitate us towards certain types of foods and away from others.
100%, 100%. And it sounds like you, just kind of like I did, you found it by default, and then you could later validate the information with looking at your gene snips. But wouldn't it be nice for some of you out there listening to save yourself the time and the experimentation with, looking at this first and saying, well, this would really be more ideal for me, and then take it or leave it. Of course, there are going to be times when you're not eating that way, but
Yeah.
wouldn't it be nice to know
Well,
what is
absolutely. And I
best
think,
for you?
yeah, and I think this whole optimization and personalization, I think that's where I see a lot of like medicine going in that direction. The acknowledgement that, I'll give you another example. I'm now in menopause. And so, the kind of one size fits all, that once women hit a certain age, everyone needs the same hormone. Well, me going
Mm.
on HRT, I gained 10 pounds almost within 2 weeks. And this speaks to a lot of things that weren't properly balanced, even though I was doing all these right things. And so I always remind people it's like cooking. It's like trying to find that perfect balance for each one of us. And it's why when I work with women, we never start with hormones first. It's always all the foundational work, because even then you can still run into these kinds of quandaries. And so I would imagine when you're working with women, you mentioned weight loss resistance. That seems to be a huge pain point for women in perimenopause and menopause in particular. And so, in your, kind of clinical experience, what are some of the big things? Because I know, I think about FTO. If you look at the research,
Yeah,
certain
no.
things. So
Yeah.
there isn't this genetic propensity. So what are some of the more common alphabet soup, if you will,
Yeah.
combinations that you will see? Sometimes it'll lead you to believe like it's not surprising this woman is experiencing this because maybe her body doesn't use fat properly. Maybe her, genetics are set up that she's going to run like a lower basal metabolic rate than someone else. What are some of the more common things you will see
Yeah.
that will increase the likelihood of being weight loss resistant?
So, and keep in mind, again, the science is still evolving. So you're looking at a lot of different types of studies. So, but here is what I can tell you with the information that I have to date. Um, Coffee is a big point that people argue over. Okay, and that is very easily determined with genotype. So there's a fast metabolizer of coffee. It's alphabet soup of AA in the detoxification pathway. So liver detoxification and clearance of caffeine. So are you clearing it quickly or not quickly? And then the CC genotype is a slow metabolizer of caffeine. And studies have shown that those slow metabolizers of caffeine, if they're heavily consuming it, they're more likely to have a heart attack. So but people may know this already about themselves if they're having the heart palpitations, if they feel anxiety. But then there's the next layer. You want to also look at COMT, which also has to do with metabolism of hormones, dopamine, estrogen, and with COMT, which also gets a lot of attention. That can also drive anxiety or not, depending on how quickly you're clearing things out. But yeah, detoxification is super, super interesting. You have, a centenarian who can live to be 100 and has smoked, a pack of cigarettes a day. And then you have another person who never smoked and gets lung cancer. So the GST genes, which are also in that detoxification pathway, have been shown to respond very well to sulforaphane, to broccoli sprouts. Um, and and so that seems to be a really interesting nutrient, and that's really what nutrigenomics is. It's all about is how to impact your expression again, by introducing the right nutrients. um, and then there's also the reverse too, is if you challenge the system with certain things, do your genes respond? There's some new research on AMY 1 and 2. That's amylase. That's the genes coding for enzymes that help you break down starch. So with people who have multiple copies of that, that's shown that they can tolerate starch better. If you have fewer copies, then less so, and that makes sense because you're able to break it down better. So yeah, it's really interesting stuff.
No, and I'm thinking of my 16-year-old who is a lacrosse and football player and is 6 feet tall and still growing.
Yeah.
And one of his favorite things in the world to eat is a big bowl of like bison or ground meat on top of a massive amount of white rice. And so my
Mm-hmm.
husband and I jokingly talk about the fact we go through rice in our house, not because we eat it, but because he eats so much of it. But I would imagine he probably has the I'm sure he has multiple copies because he's super lean. He's
Yes.
also 16, so he has time on his
Yeah,
side.
he does.
A
He's in
little
that
different.
anabolic phase, right?
Yes, the definitely the building phase. So, you mentioned sulforaphane, and so I talk a lot about broccoli sprouts and cruciferous vegetables. What are some of the other things when you're looking at carbohydrate threshold? You mentioned the amylase. When you're looking at fats and protein, what are some of the kind of broad base? Because I know we're
So
not giving
there's
personal recommendations, but
no,
some
and
of
again,
the
now we're talking about isolated gene SNPs that are low penetrance, right?
Mhm.
But TCF7L2 is another one that's really kind of that highly linked to diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and will also be another one of those that may be impacted by a high grain diet. I know that was true for me. So I have variants on TCF7L2 and I ended up, pre-diabetic. It's, right, turning 40, and insulin resistance just turned on despite my CrossFit, despite triathlon training. And I at the time had taken a job as a nutrition director at a plant-based company and had totally gone off my strict paleo diet, and was eating all their food, and my weight just ballooned there in 2 years. And then but I was thinking, it's okay. I'm doing all this triathlon training, right? And nope, not a single pound would budge. So then it was, okay, let's test it, right? If when in doubt, always do some testing. Be your own detective. And then I was, in a conference, sitting listening, and I listened to Professor Thomas Seyfried, and he just absolutely just blew my mind, talking about cancer and ketones and ketogenic metabolic therapy. And I said, okay, I don't know if this could be hard or not, but here we go. And it was amazing to just drop, 15 pounds in 6 weeks and feel that, keto high, and just happy and clarity, and not be obsessing about food. I had never been able to go like 2 hours without eating prior to this. I mean, it fasting? No, I would have looked at you like you had 10 heads. I mean, forget about it. And I haven't eaten today. It's in the afternoon. I did have a cup of black coffee, and I feel great. I feel fine. That was never a reality for me
That's
in the
incredible
past.
and
Yeah.
how powerful for you.
It's so great. It's freeing. It's very
Yeah.
freeing.
Well, and that's one of the things about, the therapeutic use of intermittent fasting that I think is so phenomenal, because I have a group of women right now that are going through one of my programs, and they're on day like 35 of 45. And the amount of women that have said, I had no idea how much freedom I now have, that I
Mm-hmm.
can go about my day, not fixated on when my next meal is, not craving food that I shouldn't be eating. I've changed my relationship with alcohol, which is definitely something I want to talk about with you,
Yes.
because the more I talk about this and the more that I learn and do research on alcohol, I think that unfortunately, the past 2 years have been very hard on everyone. Let me be
Mm-hmm.
really clear that many of us have developed healthier habits. Some of us have not.
Mm-hmm.
But I do hear from many, many women that, their alcohol consumption went up compensatory wise. Some people suddenly had little people at home 24/7, and that was stressful. And, I was a little bit more fortunate that my kids were older, a little more independent. But let's talk about alcohol, because
Yeah.
this is something that I find fascinating. And I grew up the byproduct of an alcoholic parent. And
Mm-hmm.
so my relationship with alcohol has always been a cautious one, because I saw up close and personal some of the things that happened with this parent. And obviously, there's no judgment in anything I'm saying. I just think that we need to destigmatize talking about it, because it's very triggering. I find every time I do a post on this, I either get people on one extreme or the other. And I always say there's no judgment in what I'm saying. I'm here to educate and inspire you to examine your relationship, if you have one. And so what have you found in your work and your research about alcohol and how it can impact this, epigenetic signaling and turning on and off of genes?
So alcohol completely blocks fat oxidation. And that's just a fancy way of saying you are not burning fat when you're drinking alcohol. It is the equivalent of trying to drive your car with the e-brake up. You're just like getting nowhere when, at least for weight loss. Okay. And that is something that a lot of people are either trying to recomposition their body or lose a significant amount of weight and have goals. And unfortunately, there is so much social pressure around alcohol, and it's in our faces every single day as adults. I personally never liked to drink, so because I didn't tolerate it well, and I would get violently sick. I don't detoxify alcohol or metabolize alcohol well, and so it's been very easy for me to regulate that behavior. Uh, but so if we're just talking straight genetics, yes, there are people, at least in the ApoE research, that have the newer alleles, the two, and if you're a 3-3, which is the most common, um, they're more adapted to say reap the maybe cardiovascular benefit of a glass of wine or something. But I really, I don't know if I buy into that, because alcohol is so inflammatory. And I can't think of an organ system that benefits from alcohol consumption. It's not good for your fertility, it's not good for your cognition, it's not good for your digestive tract. It's just all around just not great. It might be a little bit fun to take the edge off if you've had a stressful day, but that's where I just invite people to find other coping mechanisms, and maybe they need to get out for a walk or take a nice hot bath or learn to meditate or call a friend. And speaking of social life, it's like learn to be around your friends and really connect, because all those social interactions are about the people that you're with, not about the food you're eating or the drinks that you're consuming. That's just an excuse to then just, oh, I'm so excited to go to this restaurant so I can eat this food. No, it's about who are you going to eat with, really.
I think
That,
that's an important
yeah.
point. And I think for a lot of women in particular, when I'm working with women and they're weight loss resistant, one of the first conversations we have is, what's your relationship with alcohol? Because when you start talking about how your body prioritizes processing alcohol, because it is a toxin first before everything else, it makes
Yes.
complete sense that alcohol blocks fat oxidation. And let me be clear what this means. This means that your body is going to store fat. This means that
Yeah.
if you're struggling with weight loss resistance, this may make it worse. And the inflammation piece is pretty significant. I lived in a city for a long period of time, and there was a very prevalent mommy drinking culture. In fact, I was part of a mom's group, and
Hmm.
it was evident to me, that the meetings were always had during the week. And because I worked as an NP, I've always taken my sleep pretty seriously. And I used to always say, if I'm dealing with an emergency in the hospital, I don't want to be dealing with a hangover. Like, that would not be a good combination as a healthcare professional. And so I was sometimes shocked at how much alcohol consumption went on during the week, because you kept thinking, this is weekday. What goes on the weekend? And people really blow off steam. And so I went to a high school reunion a few years ago, and a lot of women were talking very openly about how they were weight loss resistant, they were frustrated. And alcohol for me is oftentimes the very first thing I'll suggest to people. Maybe, we need to reduce the amount of consumption, see how you feel, how your sleep goes, how your, weight loss. And so for a lot of people, it's alcohol that will drive some pretty significant acute on top of chronic inflammation. And so it's an easy fruit to pick. It's an easy thing to say, let's pull this out. Let's eliminate it for a month and see how you feel. And more often than not, people feel so much better. But it's such a socially accepted habit that it's, and like you said, that we forget that when we get together with loved ones, it's really about the connection. It's really about investing in those relationships. It's really about relationship building. And I'm starting to see more people in kind of the keto space that don't drink. I initially felt a little uncomfortable, when I went to some events and then found out I was one of many people that are not drinkers. And so that to me was very validating. I was like, okay, these are other, health conscientious people. And it's kind of nice to know I don't have to explain myself. Like that's typically the situation I'm in. I have to explain why I don't drink alcohol. And again, no judgment, but
so for your listeners, think about this. Alcohol goes in like it goes in like a sugar, but then acts like a fat. Mm-hmm. So as it's going through your liver, it's leaving behind fatty deposits in your liver and leading to that cirrhosis or that fatty liver that you absolutely do not want.
Yeah, metabolic health is wealth, and fatty liver is definitely a byproduct of nutritional choices, and that includes alcohol and processed carbs. And that was a conversation. If you have elevated triglycerides and a low HDL, and elevated fasting insulin and glucose and blood pressure, guess what? You need to re-examine your relationship with alcohol. In fact, I'm doing a talk in July, and my talk is called metabolic health is wealth. And there's too much focus on financial wealth, and I remind people you're going to get the biggest returns and how well you take care of your health, for sure.
Absolutely, because then you can keep working or doing, living your life. Yes, absolutely.
Do you have any thoughts on seed oils?
Sorry. Oh, yes. Well, let me tell you one thing. So, when people say, oh, but it's so good for your heart, it's interesting. The French cycling team who compete in the Tour de France are known for having some wine with lunch. But guess how much they have?
Couple ounces.
1 ounce.
Yeah.
It's 1 ounce. So imagine taking a shot glass and pouring out 1 ounce of wine and then putting that in your glass. It's a sip or two. I mean, and that's just not what, people can have entire bottles of wine. And then furthermore, they say, okay, because I work with a lot of, middle-aged women as well, right? I'm 48 myself, and all of what you're talking about has begun. And so they're saying, well, but, in my 20s, I was this weight and I was this, this way. And I said, yeah, but you also weren't drinking the same way. You were definitely not even drinking this much in college. You're not consuming a bottle of wine every single night. In college, you would have been puking over the toilet. Mm-hmm. And you're also much more active, and you had a lot less stress. And you hadn't had kids, all kinds of things. And the hormones were in your favor.
Yeah, now we're in reverse puberty. It's very different.
Yes, totally. Okay, seed oils. Woo. Well, I just love what Ben Azadi says about this, which he got from someone else, which is that, seed oils are more toxic than smoking and will kill you faster than smoking. So, when I heard that, because I knew they were bad, they're rancid, they oxidize in your body, they damage the lipid layer of your cells. But to hear that's like really tangible, right? That is going to shorten your life. And I'm not here to live forever, but I'm here to really age gracefully and really not just have lifespan, but have health span. Mm-hmm. I want to add life to my years. So, and I don't want my body breaking down on me. And it seems like seed oils are just the fastest way to make your body deteriorate, fastest way to get wrinkles, just fastest way to create cancer in your body. So yeah, do not consume canola, corn, soybean, sunflower seed. And by the way, oat milk, you guys, oat milk, it's mostly sunflower seed oil. That is not a healthy plant-based alternative. Really, I was surprised. I was in North Carolina recently. I was so curious. I was looking at the oat milk and I saw a brand that doesn't have sunflower seed oil. I thought, well, that's good for the oat milk lovers if they were drinking this brand. um, I do not eat grains myself, but I also don't drink milk. Um, I'll use almond, or I love macadamia nut milk. That's my new favorite.
I'm obsessed with macadamia nuts to the point where it's like I was saying, it's like I get up in the morning and I think about how can I consume an appropriate portion of macadamia nuts. And I think it's interesting. I think many people are not eating dairy, and that's not per se a bad thing.
I do eat a little bit of
Yeah,
dairy.
I don't tolerate it. So I think there's this
Okay.
natural inclination that people are looking for alternatives. And I remind them, like the brand Malk, MALK, they make, clean nut milks. I try to limit the amount of nuts I eat because I tend to be more oxalate sensitive. And ironically enough, over the weekend, we had a people at her house and someone brought some crackers. And so she was like, oh, these are gluten-free crackers. And I was wondering later why my stomach was bothering me. And I actually said to my husband when I called to find out what kind of crackers they were, because I was like, something's off. Well, they were an almond flour cracker, and guess what they had in them? Seed oils. And so I
Yeah.
said, I don't know if it was the almonds plus the seed oils, but it was
Could
enough
be
that,
both.
yeah,
Yeah.
I said, so it's like a double whammy. And I think for each one of us, it's, finding healthier options. Like I tend to do coconut milk. I do much better with that. But just, read food labels. That's a big thing. I think you can avoid seed oils if you are making your own food and reading food labels. Those two things
Totally.
alone can really limit your exposure to seed oils.
I think there are just too many almond flour
Yep.
based items in the low carb space that are getting consumed and causing inflammation and weight loss resistance as
Mm-hmm.
well. I think I made that mistake myself. It's like, oh, this is a nice like keto treat, and it's you're not doing yourself any services
No.
by having a lot of that.
No, I agree. And so for the benefit of listeners, what are some of the like key lifestyle changes you like, again, broad based? What are some of the key areas you'd like your patients to focus on? I would imagine I probably know some of these very
Mhm.
well myself, but I thought, before we start talking a little bit about testing, I would love for you to touch on some of the kind of high points that you think are really helpful for people to understand.
So, one of the things that I say is good for almost everybody is stopping eating by 7 p.m. Whether you're, seriously glucose intolerant in the evening or not, it really just benefits your digestive tract to be done 3 to 4 hours before bed. So, and then I love the work of Dr. Panda
Mm-hmm.
and his fasting work, and so yeah, stop eating on the earlier side, everybody. That's really good, because you are just, as soon as the sun goes down, your systems are shutting down, getting ready for sleep, even if you're a super night owl and you go to bed at 2. And I get that question too, but can I just eat until 11 p.m. if I go to bed at 2? It's like, no, don't, because your metabolism is not working on full speed at that hour. Your body's getting ready to slow down. Another thing that I have just about everybody do, and this is really more for pH and blood sugar regulation, is to wake up, have a big glass of water with a fresh lemon squeezed into it and a couple capfuls of apple cider vinegar. And they're welcome to maybe sweeten it with a few drops of stevia, or they can add some electrolyte powder to that. But that concoction, I call it the morning cocktail. It Studies have shown it boosts your metabolic rate to just consume plain water even by 23% first thing in the morning. Second, the apple cider vinegar is going to help just regulate your blood sugar. It's great. It's great for your stomach acid. And then lemon and apple cider vinegar are, just really alkalizing, and people can get very, very acidic. They're just really that that pH balance gets a bit out of whack, especially if they tend to go more carnivore and they're not eating as many vegetables and they're not having fruits. So plant foods are alkalizing, and not the grains though. Grains are not alkaline. And with stress causes acid in the body as well. And sleep is so important, right, Cynthia? Just 1 hour of sleep deprivation makes you insulin resistant for the whole next day. So I also recommend people walk every single day. Whether you like to do a Soul Cycle or CrossFit or whatever sport thing you like to do. Walking, though, we were designed to walk. So walking is good for all of us. Just be in motion and get out for a 45-minute walk, get some fresh air, get some vitamin D, clear your head. That's when I like to listen to podcasts.
Yep.
That's my podcast time.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was saying to someone the other day that it used to be just about that hour in the gym, whatever it was, lifting, or I was doing like a tough conditioning class. But now I focus on, strength training, of course, but also flexibility work. And then day to day, I walk anywhere from 10 to 15,000 steps a day.
Love it.
And, not to mention the benefit of being more insulin sensitive, because, it's just important to be physically active. I had surgery on my hip at the beginning of May. And so for me, a lot of what I've been doing the last 5 weeks is a lot of standing because it's more comfortable than sitting. And so what that's really taught me is I was like, oh my gosh, I set up like a little mini office in my kitchen because we have a massive island. And I was like, I actually don't mind being on my computer and just standing. And so I spend most of my day standing when I'm working as opposed to sitting when I podcast, because I feel like it allows me to just be very focused. Now, for the benefit of listeners, because they may not be familiar with some of the testing that you've been kind of alluding to,
okay.
What are some of the more common tests that you're utilizing with your clients? Obviously, we'll include links so if people want to work directly with you. But I know, oats testing and some of the genetic testing. What are some of the things that you really?
It's funny. I even have some of the kits right here. I'm in my office. So
love it.
Yeah. So this is a urine test, and I like to do organic acid testing. What is that? That's a test of your metabolism, if you will, the byproducts of your metabolism, the metabolites that are excreted out of your urine. So whether it's your, serotonin, break down your dopamine, and so there, the ratio there, the byproducts of even the bacteria and the yeast in the gut, the Krebs cycle, the beta oxidation cycle, all the
Don't
byproducts of that.
If you took science,
I'm sure you have some nerdy people listening out there. So it's just all those byproducts of different aspects of your metabolism. And so that paints a really interesting picture, but it's a snapshot of the moment, right? Genetic testing is genetic testing. It's a one and done. You do it once. I use a test called the Nutrition Genome. There are many good tests out there. 3x4 is an excellent company. Genetic testing you do once, and it's really fun to look at that with an organic acids test, because that's really metabolomics, like a totally different omics area. And you could, let's say you have digestive issues, you could also look at that in conjunction with your microbiome. I do a test with Excella that tests your microbiome. You can do stool testing, and then of course blood work. If you're, say, insulin resistant, you want to be looking at fasting insulin and A1C and C-peptide, maybe some other interesting markers there, and basic blood work, of course. But those are my top favorites. There's a lot you can do. I do heavy metals, hair testing. I love that too. I got into mold and mycotoxin testing in the past, I would say, 3 years, because I had some tough cases, people with really tough skin issues. They were very itchy. They would break out in hives. And so we'd start with food, anti-inflammatory diet. With one person, we had to go down to like 3 different foods that she could eat, and then started to reintroduce things. But interestingly, with molds and mycotoxins, which are so present in food, and we're not talking about black mold, we're talking about all these, so many thousands of species, right, of different molds that are in our world. It could be in the coffee that you're drinking. It could be if you are eating stored foods, beans, corn, grains, these dried foods, they get moldy. Melons are a very moldy fruit. Peanuts, super moldy. So molds is if you are a tough case, if you have turned over every stone and you are supremely fatigued and you have pain all over your body, or you're very, very itchy, I would encourage you to do a mold and mycotoxin test. I was shocked to go through this mold and mycotoxin conference led by Great Plains Lab, where one of the presenters talked about his dog. And the dog was like on its deathbed, it seemed. And he had the presence of mind to run a urine test on his own dog. And the dog was testing super high for molds, and turned out it was the kibble, right? Kibble, even if it's grain-free, kibble is stored dried food, and stored dried food is moldy. I worked with a woman who just, she thought it was her thyroid. She had her thyroid medication dialed in. She lost 25 pounds doing low carb. That was great, but she was so fatigued she couldn't work out. And she has these sort of like almost Olympian kids. We did her genetics. She has all the Olympian genes. I'm like, you should be working out. Your body's going to respond. And she said, I just don't have the energy. And finally, I said, let's do a mold and mycotoxin test on you. And yep, off the charts. And then she had her home tested. She borders some wetlands, and we're in New England, and it's very humid here. And her home it wasn't black mold, but it was, she had an expert come in. She started running some dehumidifiers and things, and that really helped her a lot with her energy. And but yeah, molds is an interesting, whole fascinating topic that people can specialize in.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I interviewed Dr. Aaron Hartman, who's a recognized like mycotoxin expert, and he talked a lot about mold and how 25% of the population is more genetically susceptible to mold. I happen to be one of them. And then the interrelationship with chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And so it's like this massive bucket. It's not just the mold, it's like all these other things that you just really become much more sensitive to. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. Like there's so much that's there. And I happen to live in a very, very humid southern city. And I didn't believe it. We had lived in Washington, D.C. for almost 20 years. And I was like, it's 2.5 hours south. How much more humid could it be? Well, it is very humid. And here they don't have a lot of basements. We actually have crawl spaces. And so one of the fun things we get to do this summer is encapsulate our crawl space, because we don't want the humidity to be coming up into the floor. And anyway, it's a whole separate, massively, ridiculously expensive but ultimately one thing that we need to do for everyone's safety. Now, I want to be respectful of your time. So let's talk a little bit again about Keto Symposium, and then let my listeners know how to connect with you, if they want to work with you, if they want to do this specific kind of testing, how to reach out to you.
Wonderful. So Keto Symposium is taking place in Manhattan, September 23rd and 24th. The website is ketosymposium.com, and tickets are on sale now. And we have an amazing, amazing lineup of speakers. Right now, we're running a promotion for which Cynthia can put the code up. It's Keto 10 for 10% off the tickets. The space only fits 200 people, and 88 people have registered already from the prior years that we didn't have it. So we're really looking at 115 seats, approximately. So the space is limited, guys. So take advantage if you wanna come, sign up soon. And then if you want to get in touch with me, go to theketonutritionist.com. If you want to order the nutrition genome, you can go into the shop and order it there, and then book a consultation with me through my website.
Awesome. Well, obviously, go get your tickets. It's in a great city. My husband and I will be going. I'm super excited to be able to see you again, as well as many of our colleagues and peers. And I will be taking advantage of having Kristina take a look at my epigenetics so that she can help me fine tune what I'm already doing. But thank you again for your time. It's always a pleasure to connect
It's
with
been
you.
wonderful to be on your show. Thank you so much, Cynthia.
Hey, if you like this video, you guys are going to love this video, and I'll see you there.
If you look at type 2 diabetes, which is one of the big problems, you see that it sort of lags the obesity epidemic. So as that gets worse, then diabetes gets worse, but it doesn't sort of turn around right away.